Princess Cyvera stood on the balcony of the Grand Palace, staring at the twin moons of Valeria. The cold wind brushed against her silver-blue skin, but she barely felt it. The palace, once filled with music and laughter, had become a silent tomb. There were no children. There hadn't been for centuries. The great halls, once home to the future of their kind, were now empty. The Valari people were dying, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She had tried. Every scientist, every healer, every geneticist in the Empire had searched for a cure. Some blamed the stars, saying their kind had been cursed. Others believed their ancestors had meddled too much with their own DNA, breaking something that could never be repaired. Cyvera had given up hope long ago. She turned as footsteps echoed behind her. High Chancellor Velos, her most trusted advisor, approached. His golden eyes, the same as all Valari nobles, held sorrow. "The human delegation has arrived," he said. Cyvera sighed. "And what do they want?" Velos hesitated. "They claim they may have a solution." She narrowed her eyes. "Humans. A young species, reckless and stubborn. They were physically weak compared to the Valari, but had something her people lacked: endless adaptability." She had studied their history, their rise from primitive warriors to space travelers in mere centuries. It was almost unnatural how quickly they evolved. But what could they possibly offer the Valari? "I will meet them," Cyvera finally said. The council chamber was brightly lit when she entered, her long, flowing robes trailing behind her. The humans stood in the center, surrounded by Valari guards. Cyvera immediately noticed their leader, a tall man with sharp green eyes and dark hair. He held himself with confidence, but not arrogance. Unlike the others, he did not appear intimidated by the grand architecture or the stares of the Valari nobles. "I am Captain Dorian Voss." He introduced himself with a slight bow. "It's an honor, Princess Cyvera." She studied him carefully. "You claim to have a solution to our infertility." He nodded. "We believe so." Murmurs filled the chamber. Impossible. Humans were far behind the Valari in genetic science. What could they know that her people did not? Cyvera raised a hand, silencing the whispers. "Explain." Dorian took a deep breath. "Our scientists studied your DNA structure. We found something strange. It's not that your kind is infertile. It's that something is missing. A key, something that should trigger reproduction but doesn't." She frowned. "And you believe humans have this key?" Dorian hesitated before answering. "Yes. We ran simulations. When we introduced human DNA into the sequence, it activated something. Your genes responded in ways they never have before." Silence. Then laughter. The Valari noble scoffed. "You think to mix our blood with yours? Absurd." Cyvera should have dismissed it too. The very idea was offensive. But deep inside, something told her Dorian was not lying. If he was right then. No, she refused to hope. Still, she found herself asking, "And if you are wrong?" Dorian smiled, his green eyes gleaming. "Then you lose nothing. But if I'm right, your people will live again." For the first time in centuries, a flicker of possibility stirred in her heart. Cyvera sat on her throne, staring at the human captain before her. Dorian Voss held himself with the confidence of a man who truly believed he had an answer. His green eyes remained steady, unshaken by the whispers of the Valari nobles who surrounded them. He had made a bold claim, one that could either save her people or humiliate him before the entire court. "Your words are dangerous, Captain Voss," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "Do you truly believe your kind holds the key to our survival?" Dorian nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Princess. I do." The chamber erupted in murmurs once more. Some laughed at his arrogance, others whispered in worry. The idea that humans, mere children compared to the ancient and wise Valari, could hold the answer to a problem that had plagued them for centuries was almost insulting. High Chancellor Velos, standing beside Cyvera, stepped forward. "And what proof do you have?" he demanded. Do not mistake our desperation for stupidity, human. Dorian remained composed. Our scientists ran genetic simulations using human DNA samples. The result was unexpected. Valera genes reacted to our DNA in a way we've never seen before. It was as if something dormant inside them was waiting to be activated. Silvera studied him. And you expect us to believe this? Dorian tilted his head slightly. I expect you to test it. Silence fell over the chamber. It was a challenge, a direct one. Silvera glanced at Velos, who looked troubled. She knew what he was thinking. If Dorian was telling the truth, it could change everything. But if he was wrong, it would be a waste of time and resources, another disappointment in a long list of failures. A noblewoman stepped forward, her violet robes trailing behind her. Lady Seraphis, one of the leading geneticists in the Empire, eyed Dorian with curiosity. If this is true, we would need to conduct controlled experiments. This is not something to be taken lightly. Dorian nodded. I agree. I wouldn't expect anything less. Silvera took a slow breath. She had spent years preparing herself for the end of her people. To hope now felt like a weakness. And yet, she had to know. Very well, she said. We will allow a test. A controlled experiment, nothing more. Gasps filled the room. Some nobles protested immediately, calling it an insult to their bloodline. But Silvera raised a hand, silencing them. She was the princess. Her word was final. Dorian didn't smile in victory. He only gave a single nod, as if he had expected nothing less from her. Then let's begin. In the following days, the best Valeri scientists worked alongside human researchers. Samples were taken, genetic sequences analyzed. It was slow, careful work. Then, something happened. A single sample, one that had remained inert for centuries, suddenly reacted when introduced to human DNA. Cells divided. Life stirred. Lady Seraphis stared at the results in disbelief. This should not be possible. Silvera, watching from the side, felt something she had not dared to feel in centuries. Hope. Silvera sat in the dimly lit laboratory, her mind spinning with thoughts she could barely control. The results were undeniable. Human DNA had triggered something in Valeri genetics, something that had remained dormant for centuries. The impossible had happened. The first signs of life in a Valeri embryo had been seen in over 1,000 years. Across the room, Lady Seraphis and her team of geneticists stood over glowing holoscreens, running further tests. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to cautious excitement. This was not a hoax. It was real. Dorian Voss leaned against a console, watching Silvera closely. He had said from the beginning that humans might be the key. And now he had proof. But Silvera remained wary. She turned to him. This experiment worked in a controlled environment, but a test tube is not the same as a living being. Dorian nodded. You're right. It's just the first step. Silvera's voice was cold. And what do you suggest for the next one? A heavy silence fell over the lab. No one spoke, but they all knew the answer. The only true way to test, this was with a living Valeri. The idea sent a chill through her. No one had carried a child in generations. Her people had accepted that they never would again. To attempt such a thing now was beyond risky. It was unthinkable. Dorian finally said it. Someone has to try. Silvera tensed. And who would risk their life for something that may fail? Dorian met her gaze. You. The lab went silent. Every scientist, every researcher turned to her. Silvera's breath caught in her throat. The very idea was absurd. She was the heir to the Valeri throne. She had never imagined being a mother because it was never an option. To carry a child, to bring life into this world, was something she had never allowed herself to dream of. Velos stepped forward, his golden eyes dark with concern. This is madness. We have no idea what will happen. The embryo might not survive. It could damage your body. It could kill you, Princess. Dorian's expression was steady. I won't force anything on you, Severa. But if we don't try, we'll never know. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him that this was reckless, that she had no desire to become a test subject for human science. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "What if it works?" She had lived for centuries with the knowledge that her people were dying. She had watched her kind lose all hope. But now, for the first time, there was a chance. Chance to change everything. Slowly, Severa stood. She looked around at the scientists, at Velos, at Dorian. Then she made her decision. Prepare the procedure. Gasps filled the room. Velos looked horrified, but he knew better than to argue. Lady Seraphis immediately began making preparations. Dorian stepped forward. Are you sure? Severa's silver blue eyes met his. If I do not act, then I am not worthy of leading my people. Dorian gave a small nod of respect. Then let's make history. And with that, the first true test of human and Valeri life began. Severa lay on the medical platform, her heart pounding in her chest. The lab was silent except for the hum of machinery and the soft voices of scientists making final checks. She had made her decision, but fear still coiled in her stomach like a serpent. No Valeri had carried a child in centuries. No one knew what would happen. Dorian Voss stood beside her, arms crossed. He had been confident when he made his proposal, but now even he looked tense. Are you sure about this? He asked one last time. Severa took a slow breath. I have to be. Lady Seraphis approached with the genetic serum, a delicate blend of human and Valeri DNA. Once this is done, there is no turning back, she warned. We don't know how your body will react. Severa nodded. Proceed. The serum was injected. For a moment, nothing happened. The scientists watched their screens, waiting for any reaction. Dorian watched Severa's face, looking for any sign of distress. Then she gasped. A strange warmth spread through her body. It was not painful, but it was powerful. She clutched the edges of the platform, her vision blurring for a moment. Energy pulsed through her veins, something ancient, something forgotten. It was as if her body was awakening from a long, dreamless sleep. Seraphis checked the monitors. Her body is accepting the process. A ripple of shock passed through the scientists. This was working. Days passed, then weeks. Severa expected pain, sickness, or failure, but none came. Instead, she felt stronger. Her senses sharpened. Her once cold skin now carried a warmth she had never known. She felt different. And then, the final confirmation. Seraphis scanned her body, and her eyes widened. She turned to Severa, her voice barely a whisper. Princess, it's growing. Severa's breath caught. The child. Seraphis nodded. The embryo is stable. It's developing faster than expected. The room fell into stunned silence. It had worked. Against all odds, against every failed experiment, life had taken root inside her. Dorian exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. We did it. But Severa barely heard him. She placed a hand over her abdomen, feeling a strange sensation, one she had never thought she would experience. It was subtle, but undeniable. Life. But as the news spread, not everyone rejoiced. The Valeri Council was in chaos. Some called it a miracle, a sign that their people could be saved. Others saw it as an abomination. The idea of a child born with human DNA horrified them. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the dark corners of the empire. Severa knew what was coming. She had expected resistance, but she had not expected the council's response. A messenger arrived at her private chambers, his face pale. The council demands you terminate the pregnancy. Her blood turned to ice. They dare. The messenger hesitated. They believe the child is unnatural. They say if you refuse, they will act. Severa's fingers curled into fists. The child growing inside her was not a mistake. It was proof of survival, and she would not let them take it from her. She turned to Dorian, fire in her silver blue eyes. They will have to kill me first. Xyvera stood at the window of her private chambers, staring out at the glowing city below. The twin moons of Valyria hung in the sky, casting silver light over the grand towers of the palace. It should have been a peaceful night, but her mind was anything but calm. The council wanted her unborn child gone. They called it unnatural, a mistake. Some whispered that it was a betrayal of their species. She had expected resistance, but not outright threats. Dorian Voss leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "They're afraid," he said, watching her closely. "They don't understand what this means." Xyvera turned to him. "It means survival," she said sharply. "It means hope." Dorian nodded. "To you, yes. To them, it's the unknown. And people fear what they don't understand." A knock on the door interrupted them. Velos entered, his face tight with worry. He was one of the few nobles still loyal to her, but even he looked uneasy. "They're moving faster than I expected," he said quietly. "The council is gathering supporters. Some of the military is already siding with them." Xyvera's hands curled into fists. They would start a war over this. Velos met her gaze. "They see it as saving our species in a different way. If they remove the tainted blood now, they believe we can find another solution." "There is no other solution," she snapped. "The science is clear. This is the only way." Dorian stepped forward. "What are our options?" Velos hesitated. "You have two choices. Submit to the council's demands and end the pregnancy, or leave." Xyvera narrowed her eyes. "Leave." Velos took a deep breath. "There are still those who believe in you, but they are outnumbered. If you go into hiding, take your child somewhere safe, you may have a chance to return when the time is right." The idea of running burned in Xyvera's chest. She was a princess, the rightful heir to the empire. She had never backed down from anything in her life. But this was no longer just about her. It was about the child growing inside her, the first new life in centuries. Dorian spoke carefully. "If we stay, they will force you to give up the child. Or worse." A deep silence filled the room. Xyvera looked down, placing a hand on her abdomen. The life within her was still small, still fragile, but it was real. She would not let them take it from her. She lifted her head, silver blue eyes burning with determination. "We leave tonight." Velos let out a breath of relief. "I will gather those who are still loyal. There is a hidden transport bay beneath the palace. We can get you out before the council acts." Dorian nodded. "I'll make sure she gets out safely." Xyvera looked at the two men before her. One was her oldest advisor, the other a human who had somehow become part of her fate. She would not forget their loyalty. "Then we move quickly," she said, "before it's too late." Outside, in the shadows of the city, the rebellion against her had already begun. The corridors of the royal palace were eerily silent. Too silent. Xyvera moved quickly, her deep blue cloak flowing behind her as she followed Velos and Dorian through the hidden passage beneath the throne room. The air was thick with tension. Outside these walls, the council's forces were already mobilizing, ready to strip her of the only hope her people had left. She placed a protective hand over her abdomen, her heartbeat steady but strong. She had made her choice. She would not let them take her child. Dorian moved ahead, scanning the dimly lit tunnels with his sidearm drawn. "We need to hurry. If they find us before we reach the transport bay, this escape ends before it begins." Velos nodded, his expression grim. "The council has locked down all major exits. This passage leads to a hidden hangar where a small ship waits. It's old, but it will get us off-world." Xyvera exhaled. She had spent her entire life inside the palace, ruling from above. Now she was fleeing like a criminal. The thought filled her with both anger and resolve. Suddenly, a distant explosion shook the tunnel walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. "They know," Velos whispered. Dorian grabbed Severa's arm. Move. They ran. The tunnel stretched before them, the lights flickering as the tremors from above grew stronger. Behind them, the sound of boots echoed. A hunting party. Severa clenched her jaw. The council was willing to kill her if they had to. They feared the child more than they feared the end of their own race. A sharp voice rang through the tunnel. Stop in the name of the Empire. Severa didn't stop. Neither did Dorian or Velos. Blaster fire erupted behind them. Dorian whirled, returning fire with precision. Velos activated a control panel on the wall, slamming a reinforced door shut behind them. It would not hold for long, but it bought them time. We're close, Velos shouted. They'd reached the hangar entrance, a massive underground chamber where an old, sleek starship rested on its platform. Engineers loyal to Exigera stood by, ready for launch. Dorian wasted no time. Get the ship powered up. We're leaving now. The ramp lowered, and Severa ran up, her breath ragged. Velos followed, but just as he reached the top, the sealed door behind them exploded inward. The council's soldiers poured through, weapons raised. Blaster fire filled the air. One of the engineers cried out and fell. Exigera turned, her heart pounding. Velos pulled his own weapon, firing back. Go, he shouted. Dorian grabbed Severa's wrist, pulling her toward the cockpit. We have to leave, now. Velos took cover behind a crate, firing at the advancing soldiers. His golden eyes met Severa's for a split second. There was something final in his gaze. Then he hit the control panel on the ship's ramp. It began to rise. No. Exigera reached out, but Dorian held her back. Velos smiled faintly. Protect the child. The ramp sealed shut, and the ship roared to life. Exigera pressed a hand against the cold metal, her chest tightening. Then the ship shot into the sky, leaving her home, and Velos behind. The ship trembled as it broke through Valeria's atmosphere, the gravity of the planet loosening its grip. Exigera stood in the cockpit, her hands clenched at her sides. The lights of her homeworld faded into the vast darkness of space, but she could not look away. Velos had stayed behind. He had sacrificed himself so she could escape. Dorian sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers moving swiftly over the controls. We're not safe yet, he muttered. They'll send patrol ships after us. Severa tore her gaze away from the planet below. How long until we can jump to hyperspace? Dorian glanced at the screens. The engine needs a few minutes to calibrate, if they catch us before then. A sharp alarm blared through the cockpit. They're already here, he finished grimly. Through the viewport, 3 sleek Valeri warships appeared, their silver hulls reflecting the light of the stars. Their weapons glowed ominously. A transmission flickered onto the screen. An older Valeri officer, his expression as cold as ice. Princess Severa, he said, you have defied the Council's command. Power down your vessel and surrender. Severa straightened, her silver blue eyes flashing with defiance. I will not. The officer's face remained emotionless. Then you leave us no choice. The warships opened fire. The ship rocked violently as plasma blasts struck the shields. Dorian cursed, gripping the controls. Hold on. He veered the ship hard to the left, dodging another barrage. Severa stumbled but caught herself. Can we outrun them? Not with our current speed, Dorian growled. I need time. Severa's mind raced. Surrender was not an option. She had to think. The warships were more powerful, but they were also predictable. They followed strict flight formations, something she had studied for years. She pointed to a nearby asteroid field on the star map. There. Take us in. Dorian blinked. That's suicide. Severa's gaze was steady. It's our only chance. Dorian hesitated for only a second, then spun the ship toward the jagged asteroid field. The warships hesitated before following. Severa gripped the back of the pilot's seat, her heart pounding. The ship weaved between massive spinning rocks, each one large enough to crush them instantly. The warships hesitated at the edges, their careful formations making it difficult to follow. Dorian grinned. They're struggling. A warship fired wildly, its plasma bolts striking a massive asteroid instead. The rock shattered, sending debris flying. Some of it slammed into one of the pursuing ships, damaging its engines. Severa exhaled. Keep going. We just need a little more time. The ship twisted and turned, dodging debris. The two remaining warships tried to keep up, but the narrow passages forced them to slow down. A green light flashed on Dorian's screen. Hyperspace engines are ready. Severa met his gaze. Jump now. Dorian punched the controls. The stars stretched into streaks of light as the ship leaped into hyperspace, leaving the Valeri warships behind. Severa sagged against the seat, her chest rising and falling. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And now, there was no turning back. The ship drifted through hyperspace, its engines humming softly. For the first time in hours, the danger felt distant. Severa sat in the dimly lit cabin, her hand resting on her abdomen. The child was still safe. That was all that mattered. Dorian entered, wiping sweat from his brow. We made it, he said, but his voice was tense. For now. Severa looked up. Where are we heading? Dorian tapped a console, showing a glowing planet on the screen. A remote world called Atheris IV. It's a neutral colony, far from Valeri influence. No one will look for us there. Severa studied the planet. It was lush, covered in forests and mountains. A good place to hide. How long until we arrive? 4 hours. She nodded. We'll need supplies, medical care, and she hesitated. We need allies. Dorian crossed his arms. Do you trust anyone out there? Severa's mind raced. The Valeri Council had turned against her. Many of her people would see her as a traitor. But there were still those who believed in her. There is one, she said at last. Draven Solus. Dorian raised an eyebrow. Draven Solus, the warlord? Severa shook her head. He is no warlord. He is a strategist, a survivor. He was exiled from Valeria years ago for challenging the council. If anyone will help us, it's him. Dorian exhaled. That's a risk. Severa met his gaze. We don't have a choice. 4 hours later, the ship emerged from hyperspace, Atheris IV filling the viewport. It was beautiful, a world untouched by war. But beauty meant nothing if they weren't safe. Dorian guided the ship toward a small outpost hidden among the mountains. It was an old trading post, abandoned by the Empire long ago. But someone had made it their home. As they landed, Severa felt a strange unease. This place was quiet, too quiet. The ramp lowered, and the two stepped out, weapons ready. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of rain and earth. But before they could take another step, a voice echoed from the shadows. Took you long enough. A tall figure emerged from the trees. His armor was worn, his dark hair streaked with silver, but his eyes burned with intelligence. Draven Solus. Severa stood firm. You've been watching us. Draven smirked. A ship like yours arriving here. Of course, I watched. His gaze flicked to her abdomen. And I heard rumors. Seems they were true. Severa lifted her chin. The council wants my child dead. Draven's expression darkened. Then they've truly lost their minds. Dorian tensed. Are you with us or against us? Draven studied them both, then sighed. I fought the council once, and I lost everything. I don't make the same mistake twice. Severa's heart sank. Then we should leave. Draven's lips curled into a slow smile. I didn't say I wouldn't help. I said I don't make the same mistake twice. He stepped forward. This time, I plan to win. Atheris IV was quiet, but Severa knew silence could be deceiving. In the hidden outpost, she stood with Dorian and Draven Solus, watching as a small group of exiled Valyri and human rebels gathered before them. They were fighters, survivors, people who had lost faith in the Empire but still clung to hope. Draven stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the tension. The Council believes they've already won. They think Princess Xaviera is dead. They think her child, the first new life in centuries, is no longer a threat. His piercing eyes scanned the crowd. They are wrong. A murmur spread through the group. Some looked uncertain, but others, those who had suffered under the Council's rule, stood taller. Xaviera took a breath and stepped forward. "I did not run because I was afraid," she said firmly. "I ran because my people deserve better. Our species is dying, and the Council would rather cling to their power than accept the truth. My child is not a curse. It is the key to our survival." A woman with battle scars crossed her arms. "And what do you expect us to do? We're outnumbered, outgunned." Dorian smirked. "Yeah, but they're not ready for a fight. The Council is arrogant. They think they've already won." Draven nodded. "We don't need an army. We need chaos, a spark to ignite the fire." He turned to Xaviera. "You are that spark." Xaviera's mind raced. She had spent her life as a ruler, trained to command from a throne. But now she had to fight, not just for herself, but for her child, for Valeria's future. She looked at the rebels. "We don't need to overthrow the Council overnight. We need to show the people the truth, that there is another way, that I am alive, and the Council is lying to them." Draven grinned. "I know just the way to do that." Within hours, the plan was set. Etheris IV had an old communication array, one powerful enough to send a message across the entire Valyri Empire. If they could access it, Xaviera could broadcast a message to her people before the Council could stop them. As night fell, the group moved through the dense forests toward the abandoned relay station. Dorian and Draven led the way, their weapons ready. Xaviera stayed close, her heartbeat steady. She had no doubt the Council would track the signal once it was sent, but by then, it would be too late. They reached the station. It was old, rusted from years of neglect, but still operational. Dorian quickly began powering it up, while Draven secured the perimeter. Xaviera stepped in front of the camera. The screen flickered to life, broadcasting her image across the stars. "To my people," she began, her voice strong. "I am Xaviera, rightful heir to Valyria. The Council has lied to you. They fear the future, but I embrace it. My child is proof that we can survive, that we can thrive." She took a breath. "I am not dead, and I am not afraid." Alarms blared. Dorian cursed. "They found us." Draven grabbed his rifle. "Then let's give them a fight." As enemy ships descended from the sky, Xaviera stood tall. The spark had been lit. Now, the fire of rebellion would burn.